Ever get the feeling, like when you're just talking, that you're accidentally channeling, like, a pirate
Right.
or referencing, like, medieval hygiene practices?
Well, if you ever use the phrases bury the hatchet or caught red-handed, you're doing exactly that.
True. It's like that's the beauty of idioms, though, right? These
Yeah.
quirky little phrases we just, like, sprinkle into everyday conversations are like little time capsules,
They are,
each with a story.
each with a story to tell about where our language comes from.
Exactly.
And some of those stories are wilder than others.
Oh, tell me about it.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the surprisingly twisted, often hilarious origins of some of the most common English idioms,
I'm excited.
all thanks to those articles you sent over.
Oh yeah, those were fun.
Brutal beginnings, awkward encounters,
Oh yeah.
even a few shady livestock deals gone wrong.
It's gonna be good. So it's a fascinating look at how language evolves and how even the simplest phrases can give us a glimpse into like the lives and times of those who came before us.
Absolutely.
So are you ready to uncover the hidden history behind the sayings you use every day?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay. Let's start with a category we're calling brutal beginnings, violence, and mishaps.
Okay.
And trust me, some of these origin stories are not for the faint of heart. First up, let's talk about bite the bullet. We use it to mean facing a difficult situation head on, but this idiom has a much more literal and painful past.
It does. Imagine this. It's the 19th century. Battlefield medicine is still in its infancy,
Yep.
and you need surgery. No fancy anesthesia for you. Your best option to deal with the pain is literally biting down on a bullet.
Oh, okay, I'm wincing just imagining that.
Yeah.
It really puts our modern anxieties into perspective, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And what's interesting about this idiom is that we can actually trace its evolution in literature.
Oh, wow.
One of the sources you provided, the novel The Light That Failed, published in 1891, uses the phrase.
Wow. That's not that long after the time period we're talking about.
Right.
It really shows how quickly a phrase can go from describing a very specific and brutal act
Right.
to a more like metaphorical expression of resilience.
Exactly. And that transition from the literal to the figurative is a key part of how idioms develop and embed themselves in our language.
Right.
Mm.
Speaking of like finding ourselves in a tight spot, our next idiom takes us from the battlefield to, well, a medieval butcher shop with caught red-handed. This one always conjured like images in my head of someone caught stealing cookies with like jam on their face. But
Right.
I have a feeling the real story is a bit more visceral.
Let's just say there's a reason why that shade of red came to signify being caught in the act. In medieval times, this idiom wasn't metaphorical at all.
Oh?
If you were accused of poaching livestock,
Okay.
the most damning evidence against you wasn't a smoking gun, but rather blood on your hands.
Oh, wow. Talk about a literal interpretation.
Right.
And I'm guessing, like, hygiene standards weren't exactly a top priority back then.
Not so much.
So that image of being caught red-handed must have been pretty hard to dispute.
You're exactly right. And it's fascinating how that visceral reaction we have to the color red and its association with being caught has stayed with us through the centuries.
It's like this direct line to our ancestors' experiences, like, embedded in our language. It gives you a new appreciation for, like, the weight that a simple phrase can carry.
Absolutely. It shows how deeply intertwined language is with human history, culture, and even our primal instincts.
It's true. Well, on that note, let's move from the butcher shop to a slightly more somber setting,
Okay.
but one that also reminds us of the power words hold.
Okay.
Our next brutal beginning takes us to the American Civil War with meet a deadline.
Oh, okay.
I have to admit, I never really thought about where this phrase came from,
Right.
but knowing its origins, like, completely changes how it lands.
It's a stark reminder that sometimes the most commonplace phrases we use have their roots in tragedy. During the Civil War, prisoners of war were often confined within stockades. And to prevent escape attempts, a literal line, a deadline, was drawn about 20 feet from the inner wall.
I think I know where this is going.
Sadly, you're right.
Yeah.
Crossing that line meant certain death for the prisoners.
Oh, gosh.
It's a chilling example of how a simple, everyday phrase we use to talk about project deadlines had life or death consequences just a few generations ago.
Wow, that really highlights the importance of understanding the history behind the language we use, even when those histories are difficult to confront.
Yeah.
For all of the talk about, like, brutal battlefields and medieval butcher shops,
Right.
I have a feeling our next category might hold like the most relatable origin stories yet.
Oh, absolutely. Let's face it, social customs
Yeah.
and etiquette can be their own battlefield, even without literal bloodshed.
It's so true. It's like that's a perfect segue into our next category, social customs.
Okay.
And first up, we're tackling an idiom that's as passive-aggressive as it gets. Give the cold shoulder. I always pictured like physically turning away from someone,
Right.
but knowing how much our ancestors loved symbolism and like subtle gestures, I'm guessing there's more to this story.
Oh, you bet there is. Picture this. You're a guest at a medieval banquet,
Yeah.
enjoying the festivities when suddenly you're served a cold, unappetizing shoulder of meat,
Oh,
likely a leftover from previous meals.
no.
Now, this wasn't just a culinary faux pas.
Right.
It was a clear signal from your host.
Ouch. So it's like I'm sensing some serious shade being thrown here.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
it was their way of saying time to wrap it up without actually saying the words.
Yeah, precisely. It was all about maintaining a veneer of politeness while subtly signaling that your welcome had worn thin.
Hmm.
It makes you wonder if our modern-day anxieties about, like, social media unfollows are really that different from the social dynamics of a medieval feast.
Right. Some things never change. But hey, I think I'd take a cold shoulder of meat over a literal deadline any day.
Right.
Speaking of things we'd rather not repeat from history,
Okay.
let's move on to a phrase that feels much more liberating. Let your hair down.
Oh, yeah?
This always makes me think of like relaxing after a long day, but
Yeah.
something tells me it wasn't always associated with such a carefree attitude.
You're right to be suspicious. In the 17th century, a woman's hair,
Okay.
especially for those in the upper classes, was a serious matter. We're talking elaborate updos, intricate braids, and enough pins and ribbons to make a modern-day hairstylist sweat.
I can only imagine the time, effort, and like pain that went into maintaining those styles.
It was practically a full-time job.
Right.
And it wasn't just about vanity.
Right.
Those elaborate hairstyles were a symbol of status,
Right, of course.
of fitting into those rigid social hierarchies. So for a woman to let her hair down literally
Yeah.
meant letting go of those societal expectations, embracing comfort and freedom, even if only for a little while.
It's amazing how such a simple act could take on such like powerful meaning.
Right.
And it makes you appreciate how idioms can capture these little rebellions, these moments of like pushing back against the norm.
Exactly. And it shows how even the most everyday actions can be imbued with cultural significance,
Right.
reflecting the anxieties and aspirations of the time.
Totally. Speaking of anxieties and perhaps a bit of envy,
Yeah.
our next idiom takes us right back to those extravagant hairstyles of the 17th century with bigwig. I'm picturing those massive powdered wigs that seem to defy gravity and like good judgment
Yeah.
in some cases.
And remember how we were talking about those elaborate hairstyles as status symbols?
Yes.
Well, those bigwigs, often made with real human hair, were the epitome of wealth and influence.
Makes sense. So the bigger the wig, the bigger the statement,
I got
and
it.
probably the bigger the personality to match.
You've got it. Those wigs were like walking billboards announcing to the world, look at me, I can afford to wear something this impractical and expensive.
Oh my gosh. It's so interesting how something as like seemingly superficial as hair could become such a like powerful marker of social standing.
Right.
It makes you wonder what future historians will make of our modern day obsessions
Right.
with like designer sneakers or the perfect avocado toast Instagram post.
But there's a thought-provoking question. What seemingly mundane aspects of our lives
Right.
will become the baffling, hilarious idioms of the future?
It's true. But before we spiral too far into the future, we have a whole menagerie of idioms waiting for us in our next category, animal antics.
Let's go.
And let's just say, things are about to get a little wild.
I
Where
don't
should
know.
we start? Okay, let's dive into these animal antics. I'm ready for some idiom origins gone wild.
All right, we'll get ready for some shady dealings and marketplace shenanigans because we're starting with let the cat out of the bag.
Ooh, okay. I've always pictured like an actual cat escaping from a bag, and knowing how much chaos a startled cat can cause, I figured that was the extent of the idiom's origin.
Right.
But something tells me there's more to this story.
You're right to suspect a twist. This idiom has a history of trickery woven right into it. Imagine. You're in an 18th century marketplace.
Okay.
Livestock is being traded left and right.
Right.
And amongst the crowd are some, shall we say, less than honest sellers.
Oh, no. I think I see where this is going. What were they up to?
These shady characters would try to pass off a common cat as a more valuable piglet, hiding it in a bag to disguise the swap. Can you imagine the uproar when a buyer got home and discovered they'd been duped?
Oh, yeah, not good. That's one way to expose a scam. And
Yeah.
it makes the modern usage of the phrase so much more vivid, doesn't it?
Mhm.
It's not just about, like, revealing a secret. It's about uncovering a deception,
Right.
blowing the lid off a carefully constructed illusion.
Exactly. And it shows how idioms can preserve these glimpses into the everyday realities of past eras, the scams, the street smarts, the shared understanding of what it meant to be in the know.
It's true. It's like we get it. Speaking of being in the know, or perhaps not knowing where to look, let's sniff out the origins of barking up the wrong tree.
Right.
This one feels almost self-explanatory, right? We've
Right.
all been there,
Oh, yeah.
pursuing a path that leads to a dead end.
But what's interesting about this idiom is that while the feeling of being misled is universal, the imagery it uses takes us back to a time when hunting dogs were less about companionship and more about necessity.
Okay, so we're talking about like literal barking up the wrong tree here.
Exactly. Imagine. You're relying on your trusty hound to track down dinner. You're counting on its instincts, its ability to sniff out the prey. But sometimes, even the most skilled dog can get it wrong, barking excitedly at a tree where the squirrel or raccoon has long since moved on.
Oh, man. And that feeling of wasted effort, of
Yeah.
following a false trail, it's like, it's something that transcends time, isn't it?
It really is.
Whether we're like hunting for dinner or the answer to a complex problem, that frustration of being misled is something we can all relate to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we're not so different from those who came before us, even if our hunting grounds have shifted from forests to boardrooms.
It's true. Okay. Last but not least, in our animal-themed adventure, let's talk about an idiom that always makes me smile. Straight from the horse's mouth.
Okay.
I've always loved the imagery of asking a horse for advice.
Right.
But I'm guessing the real story is a bit more, shall we say, grounded.
You could say that.
Yeah.
While we might not be consulting equines for life advice,
Right.
the core idea behind this idiom is just as relevant today. The importance of getting information from the most reliable source.
Right, of course. So where does the horse come in?
Think about a time when horses were essential to everyday life for transportation, trade, farming. A healthy horse was a valuable asset, and knowing its age was crucial for determining its worth.
So like checking the mileage on a used car today, but way more organic.
Exactly. And the most reliable way to determine a horse's age. You guessed it, by examining its teeth. So to get information straight from the horse's mouth meant you were cutting out the middleman, bypassing any potential for embellishment or outright deception. You were getting the unvarnished truth right from the source.
It makes you wonder if those horse traders ever anticipated that. Like centuries later, we'd be using their trade secret to talk about everything from office gossip to political scandals.
Right. It really highlights how language adapts and evolves, carrying these kernels of wisdom and experience with it.
It's true. Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? From brutal battlefields to awkward medieval dinners, and even the perils of trusting a shady livestock merchant. It's incredible how these seemingly simple phrases we use every day hold such fascinating and sometimes bizarre stories.
It's a testament to the power of language,
Yeah,
how it reflects not only our history but also our shared human experience.
it's so true. And who knows, maybe centuries from now,
Right.
future word nerds will be dissecting our modern day sayings, trying to make sense of terms like doom scrolling or yet.
I hope so.
Right. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
It was so fun, and thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration of, well, anything and everything under the linguistic sun.